Nobody, no crime. Well, not on my time. Eyes are watching, giving victims a voice. Raise your voice from Delphi to Camden, and there will be no more botching. We might not be Dateline, but come along if you want a great time. Grab yourself a glass of wine, and let's talk some true crime. And hey, you'll even have an alibi if you collect evidence in red solo cups. If your expert says it just did, you might have a problem. We might not be Dateline, but come along if you want a great time. Grab yourself a glass of wine, and let's talk some true crime. And hey, you'll even have an
Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here. Today, we are so excited to have our next guest. He is a former federal prosecutor and attorney to the stars. He was also one of the youngest to graduate Harvard. He is a brilliant mind of all things legal, and we are so excited to have him today. Let's bring on Neama Rahmani.
Hi, Lauren. So excited to be on
Hi.
with you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. I know you're extremely busy, so I am the one that is thankful. So thank you so much. How are we doing? I know you've been busy with some trials last week, I believe it was, right?
Yeah, we just wrapped up a trial against Kanye West, now known as Ye. First time he's ever actually showed up in court to testify. So it was a wild one. I know it's not the subject of this show, but that's the fun of, living and working in Los Angeles. You represent celebrities, you sue celebrities. So I know we were talking about true crime, but we get entertainment. We get it all over here.
Yes, you never know what's going to happen. So that was a great one. I heard it was very interesting. So
Yes.
amazing,
Fascinating.
amazing.
Got to do a show about it one day.
Yes, I would love it. I want to hear all the things. So I have always seen you on Court TV, and I've always just thought you were great. I always feel like I learned something when you're on. And so when I was able to do a segment with you, I think it was a couple months ago, I was super pumped for it. And so when this case, things kind of started headed into the direction of there could possibly be federal charges brought against Kelsey's ex-fiance, you were literally the first person I thought of. So I'm so happy that you're here, and we can talk about the case and, all of the things with you. So I know I sent you a lot of documents, so I don't know how much you were able to dive into the case, but this case one is one that has so many layers to it, like a family court issue and a criminal issue and all of that. So I have been kind of very outspoken about this case, and it hasn't gotten a lot of coverage. So that's kind of what we're hoping to get a little bit more coverage as she goes to trial next week. So
Yeah, I'm excited to talk about it. Like you said, obviously you have this underlying family law issue, restraining order. Look, I mean, it's a big deal. And, we've seen just with the new Bachelorette, right? Where you have this family law component, right? That ends up resulting in a potential violent situation. Now, in this case, obviously, it was just Kelsey herself who got shot. But there's really a thin line between, someone's child and violence. And certainly I'm not condoning violence in any way, but it really just goes to show how people react, and sometimes react in a potentially negative way when they think they may be losing their kids.
Right. I mean, I can't even imagine, having that happen. And right before that, things were breaking down with her fiance. She goes from having a great career, a fiance, and potential wedding in a couple weeks to having none of that and then having her baby stripped from her. So I can't even imagine, the mindset of what was going on, all by people in her department that she was close to. My thing with the police department and how this thing was kind of handled is I used to work at DCF. And so I know, like, when you go in the home, you usually have a DCF worker to remove the child to take custody. That was not done here. Also, there was a order for them to seize weapons. And that's kind of just 101 procedural to go in, and if anyone's a potential danger to themselves or others, to do that. And in this case, that was not done. All of the things happened before they even got around to possibly looking for weapons. And I wanted to get your thought on that.
Yeah, so actually, it turns out that I'm pretty familiar with this issue, not because I've handled these types of cases, but my wife is actually minors counsel in these types of cases here in California. We call them DCFS, but
Oh, wow.
similar, right? Social
Yeah.
services, CPS, whatever you want to call it. So she represents the children who are taken away from their parents in these types of cases. So when you have a custody case, at least here in California, you have three sets of lawyers. You have the county, they tend to prosecute the cases. They want to, terminate the parental rights or take the children, put them in, guardianship or foster care. The parents get an appointed lawyer. Again, at least here in California, it's such a fundamental right. It's the only time outside a criminal case that the government will give you a lawyer because you may lose your kids. So there's a third set of lawyers, and they're the lawyers for the child because the parents, they have a conflict. They can't hire the children's lawyer. So I'm very familiar with these cases, not because of personal experience, but having been married for many years. And so I understand. And you're right. When you go in with social workers, right? Because,
Yes.
you're dealing with kids and you're dealing with parents who are losing their child. So it's law enforcement, but it's really quasi law enforcement. I understand that obviously there's a family law component, and family law is separate from dependency or whatever it's called in each respective states. But you're right. Best practices go with social workers, and certainly the first thing you want to do is make sure that there are no weapons. And here you have someone who's law enforcement, right? There are going to be weapons. So I respect law enforcement, but we've seen it in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts before that, they've botched cases before. I mean, obviously Karen Reed's probably the most notorious example, but I'm sitting here in LA, go back to OJ. Law enforcement is not above criticism, so they can make mistakes too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this didn't help, that being on the heels of the Karen Reed verdict and it only being like an hour away from Canton definitely didn't help. And then we find out, and I didn't realize that your wife had all of that experience to bring to this and her knowledge too. So what do you think about the fact that not only did they not take a social worker and secure the weapons, but then they also didn't they had Justin, who he had just gotten the restraining order, inside the house when the child was being taken.
Yeah, I'm shaking my head. It's really sort of not best practice, to put it mildly. And, to put it really bluntly, really sort of poor law enforcement. So what you want to do is, the last thing you want is for our criminal justice system to be used as leverage and any other type of dispute, right? It could be a civil dispute, it could be a family law dispute, right? It really does bring the worst out of people. And again, I'm not saying that allegations are untrue. Obviously, I don't know what's going on between Justin and Kelsey, but
Right.
In these nasty custody disputes and separations, divorces, whatever, there can be false allegations and accusations because people want their child. I mean, it's just the reality. So, you have to really be careful. Now here, obviously, look, if a judge grants a restraining order, and we're just talking about service, it's law enforcement's job to serve it. But ideally, if, you have, individuals who are associated with the agency and there may be a potential conflict or even just bias, right? What you want to do, and we saw this with Karen Reed too, you really want to bring an outside agency. That's going to be the best practice to handle service in a case like this, right? You certainly don't want to bring in one of the parties into the home where there might be violence, there might be all sorts of allegations, evidence being planted. It just fodder for cross-examination. And maybe they weren't thinking that this would result in a criminal case, but that's why you don't use the same law enforcement agency in these cases. Again, going back to Karen Reed, right? Think of all the many through both trials, right? Grueling days of cross-examination that probably could have been avoided, and all the sort of conspiracy theories and the cover-up, Lauren. I mean, we don't have to rehash that case. Had they just said, hey, these are our officers that are involved. Let's bring in an agency, whether it's from another city or another county, to handle this particular case, because that's really what you're supposed to do. When I was at the U.S. Attorney's Office, if there was ever an issue, or when I was at the city of LA, if there was ever an issue with someone who was employed within the Department of Justice or within the city, you'd bring in an outside agency, because whether there's the perception or misperception, you don't want even the appearance that the investigation is tainted in any way because of friendships or relationships or bias.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more with you. We've had some former law enforcement agents on the show who also had, said the exact same thing, and sentiments that you just did. I mean, this was also, to bring another layer to it of the PTSD and trauma. The officer that actually shot her a year prior was Kelsey's former partner, that they went on a call that ended up being a murder suicide of a mother and an infant baby. And both of them were very shaken up about it. And that office didn't provide them any kind of mental health treatment or options, or even give them time off, that kind of thing. And so, my question is, did that play a part in this potential situation, seeing his partner, his friend, with a gun in her hand, and all of that? So, yeah, I just have a lot more questions that maybe the public wouldn't have, like you said, had they done things differently.
Yeah, it just creates unnecessary issues at trial. And this is a terrible analogy given what happened, but these are self-inflicted wounds that are just unnecessary, right? Because then all of a sudden, and again, I'm as pro prosecution as they come, all of a sudden law enforcement is on trial, right?
Right, right.
It's not about and obviously in this case, everyone is law enforcement, but again, going back to like a Karen Reed or an OJ Simpson type case where all of a sudden the jury's focus shifts, and I understand it's a bench trial, but the jury's focus shifts from not what happened, but all these ancillary sort of other issues related to law enforcement. And look, the defense, they love nothing more than to go on the offense. The best defense is a good offense. And this is defense lawyering 101, to put law enforcement on trial. And these are all things that could have easily been avoided had they just taken some very simple steps of just contacting someone else and saying, hey, this involves one of our officers, actually two of our officers potentially. We need you guys to step in and handle this. It happens all the time, Lauren. I just don't understand why it didn't happen in this case.
I don't either. And I think that's the frustration on the public's part. We just don't get it. And now I know you have experience in the federal level as a former federal prosecutor. So I am so excited to pick your brain about this. So I don't think I believe that I sent you the actual video where we see Justin, Kelsey's ex fiance, breaking in the home, just 3 days after she has had this gunshot wound, is in the hospital fighting for her life. But it is just a video of him breaking down the door with his firefighter buddies. He then proceeds to go in the basement and rip the surveillance, all of the security system that her father had just come and set up, out. And then the allegations in some of the papers are that he then takes money, takes gift cards, takes her computer back to his mom's house. And in that computer, he accesses her bank account, Facebook, and changes the passwords to then go into her account and transfer funds of $5,000 over to his personal account, and also takes her passport out of the safe that was locked up. And then he also allegedly attempts to change her beneficiary in her police documentations to himself, as well as access her medical records. So the DA's office has failed to charge him. They said that there's nothing to see here, basically, and that if he gets on the stand, pleads the fifth, they're going to offer him a deal. And I think that is another reason that the community is outraged by this. So I think so many people have sent in questions wanting to know what your take is on this. What is the likelihood that the feds might pick this up, that there could be possible federal charges on him? And I just want you to tell us all the things.
Sure, it's certainly possible. I mean, one thing I did as a federal prosecutor was to investigate law enforcement, state and federal, right? I mean, that's one of the jobs of the Department of Justice. And whether it's a civil rights violation or some other violation, I mean, obviously these are just allegations. I haven't seen the video. They may well be true. Justin may be guilty. He may be absolutely innocent. And this might just be, fodder for the media and just to try to gain leverage in this underlying custody dispute, right? But if the allegations are true and the district attorney's office is not investigating because they either have a conflict or they don't think that it really merits prosecution, it's certainly something that the Department of Justice should be looking at. We cannot have law enforcement officers, could be Kelsey pointing the gun at someone or Justin breaking and entering into someone else's home, right? And engaging in this type of conduct. Now, fortunately, when it comes to, and I haven't seen the video tends to be the best evidence, but that's why I love electronic evidence, right?
Yes,
There's always going to be that digital forensic, call it paper trail, but electronic trail, right? If someone's logging into her Facebook while she's in the hospital, if someone's transferring funds, if someone's accessing medical records, if someone's changing beneficiaries, that should be pretty easy for federal agents, whether it's the FBI or any other law enforcement agency, to ascertain. And this is the last thing we want our police officers doing, because it really undermines trust in our law enforcement. I mean, there's a lot of people that are watching that probably don't trust police because they think they're corrupt. I'm not necessarily one of them. But when these types of things happen and you see officers breaking the law, it really violates the public's trust and really harms all the other law-abiding police officers. That's why, even though I support law enforcement, I respect them, they have dangerous jobs, I also believe that they should be prosecuted to the full extent of the law when they violate the law, because I think it harms everyone else who is following the law. It's not just one bad apple. If you don't take care of it, it can really poison the entire well. So the allegations are true. I absolutely do think that Justin should be prosecuted, again, if there's merit to it.
Sure. And then also I had another question for you along those lines. That was something that was stated from this district attorney and the prosecutor who the defense team presented all this evidence to. He basically said, we have a conflict, and then he sent it over to the county over. They said, we also have a conflict, and then sent it back to him. And that's when the alleged deal talkings began. So my question is, do they even are they ethically allowed to do that, having a conflict to offer a deal?
They shouldn't. So what should happen is, if the county has a conflict, typically, and again, I'm telling you what typically happens here in California is
Sure.
the attorney general is going to step in, the state attorney general, to handle the case. That's generally proper protocol, and I've seen it in other states as well. That is their job, to step in when the county has a conflict. I don't think, again, even though they're separate cases, I really want to make sure that people understand, both Kelsey and Justin can both be guilty, right?
Sure.
And which is important. And I think the cases do have to be analyzed separately. They're separate incidents on separate days. But I think that, given at least the appearance that there's a conflict and folks saying there's a conflict, the last thing you should be doing is offering deals, because that deal could be problematic, especially if the deal is a non-prosecution agreement, immunity, something to that effect. That's a problem. And, obviously, as a victim, Kelsey has rights, but she doesn't have the right to make sure that Justin's prosecuted. And same thing the other way. That's why you want really an independent, unbiased prosecutor. So I'm not surprised, the AG or someone else didn't step in and really handle this case. That really would have been best practice and what's, ethically required.
Right. Well, that's really good to know. That was something that I was like, can they even do that? And again, there is public outrage too because he is a public servant and is a firefighter. So there is that level of trust that the community already has in him, and then seeing him on camera doing these things is just kind of infuriating to a lot of people. So um, also, we had some other questions that were sent in. Now, if they were offered immunity on a state level, like this prosecutor has said, would that carry over if the feds picked it up and choose to go after him or something?
The answer is no. They're dual sovereigns. So typically, you don't have parallel state and federal prosecutions. It does happen once in a while. Probably the biggest case right now is Luigi Mangione. Again, not typical. The feds may ultimately dismiss that case because the murder and gun charges were dismissed for unrelated reasons. I won't get into legal weeds. But we've seen it. We saw it with Derek Chauvin, the murder of George Floyd. If you remember Ahmaud Arbery, the McMichaels, Roddy
Yes.
Bryan. But again, it's not something you typically see, but it's possible, absolutely. And the state can't bind the feds, and vice versa, right? That's why people are always talking about these pardons. For instance, if the president Donald Trump pardons someone, that has no effect on the state. Similarly, if the governor takes an action to pardon someone, or the DA or the AG prosecutes or doesn't prosecute, that cannot in any way bind the feds. Now, the DOJ does have an internal policy. It's called the Pettit policy, where they typically don't do this. But again, it's theoretically possible. Absolutely. The state gives some sort of immunity, non-prosecution agreement, declines prosecution. That doesn't bind the feds in any way at all.
Okay. And I know you can't probably speak to, how that process happens, but if the federal government was given all this information, is there a certain standard that it has to meet for them to require charges? I know on a level this isn't, compared to a lot of other bigger cases, this is kind of small beans, but like, to people who are invested in this case, it seems, so outrageous that they wouldn't prosecute. So how does the process work, if you can give us any insight
Absolutely.
into that?
So there are two types of federal prosecutions, and I'll describe them and sort of how they were. This would be what's called a kind of a proactive case, and I'll explain the difference. So you're right, absolutely, Lauren. We talked about quote federal case. Don't make a federal case. That is typically not a federal case, breaking and entering, changing passwords and so forth. But there are two ways cases come into the federal system. The first is someone's been arrested for some reason, right? The border, airport, whatever it is. Law enforcement, they can take the case to the feds, right? So for instance, I typically did drug and human trafficking, right? DEA would arrest someone, FBI, HSI, Homeland Security Investigations. That was a big case. They would bring it into the U.S. Attorney's Office and say, hey, Neama, or whoever was on call. There's always an on call or what we call duty AUSA. And they would say, hey, does the U.S. Attorney's Office want this case? And we had a criteria, obviously this for drugs, for instance, or trafficking. And we kind of take a look at that, and we would make a decision whether we wanted the case. That's a reactive case. It might be in person, it might be over the phone. And you'd have to make a decision really on the fly, because the person's in custody. And if the feds don't take it, then they're going to take it state, right? Here would be the district attorney or the city attorney here in California. Now, for a proactive case, someone hasn't been arrested, right? But you have the evidence. Then what will happen is agents will come to a U.S. attorney, assistant U.S. attorney they have a relationship with, or whoever happens to be in the intake team or on duty, and they'll present the case. And then there will be some sort of informal discussion, but then there will be actually a prosecution memorandum prepared. If I, as the assistant U.S. attorney, thought the case merited prosecution, I would, because again, this person hasn't been arrested and we're deciding to arrest them and to charge them or to take this case to the grand jury for an indictment. And then you meet with the prosecution team. Typically, again, each office is a little bit different, but they meet once a week. And these cases are discussed with the prosecution team. Oftentimes, it's the U.S. attorney, maybe the chief of the criminal division, chiefs of the different sections. This might be, for instance, what's called a general crimes type case, because it's not a fraud, it's not narcotics, it's not a national security case. Potentially it's public corruption, but the chiefs are there, and you round table the case based on the evidence that's been provided in a written memorandum form, and you make a decision. So that is how a decision in a case like this would be made, with a prosecution memorandum and the prosecution team.
Okay, that is very helpful. I think, a lot of us, we kind of wonder how the feds work because we don't get to see a lot of trials because there's no cameras in there. So any kind of insight like that, I love to have, and I know the viewers will also very much appreciate. And is that a long process, or does that kind of happen on the same?
It depends. Yeah, this is a little bit inside baseball. So sometimes, my prosecution memo was fantastic. Folks would read it. I'd say, do you have any questions? And, it was a clear-cut case that, someone should be arrested, someone should be prosecuted, I should be in the grand jury tomorrow. We get our witnesses lined up and go. Sometimes, especially if it's a different type of case like this would be, if the case isn't as strong, or frankly, people thought it's not a good use of government resources, then you start getting the questions, right? So let's say I was the line AUSA, who was pitching this case. People would say, well, listen, this is, a residential burglary. This is a custody dispute. Why are we using the resources of the federal government to handle this type of case when there's all these other cases that, are matters of, like I said, national security, public corruption, right? We have, let's say, the public corruption section. We have officers taking bribes, right? We have officers engaging in sex with underage children. There's been some of that in the Commonwealth recently, right? Where
Yes,
with the
definitely.
feds having to get involved, they might say, well, listen, this is a better use of federal resources because the federal government does have limited resources. They don't have the man and woman power to handle all the cases that state prosecutors typically do. It's just not set up like that, both in terms of federal court, which tends to be a little bit more slow moving. They want to take the more important cases, the big cases. So you might get pushback and say, why are we, the Department of Justice, getting involved? And then, I might say, well, listen, this is a case where, the district attorney, the folks at the county level, they have a conflict. They haven't taken this case. I think we, as neutral and detached, should really look into it. You're talking about a police officer, you're talking about firefighters. An officer was shot. What was the victim here? So you might want to make your case in terms of the strength of the evidence, but also the merits of the federal government's involvement. So you get questions as the one who's pitching the case, and ultimately it's up to the U.S. attorney and the men and women below him or her to decide whether to accept the case for prosecution or decline.
Okay, that is great to know. Now, one little twist I want to ask about. Now, say the trial happens and more things of corruption come out, and there would possibly be a 1983 lawsuit in the future. Is that something that would help that federal entity possibly look into it more, take it more serious?
Absolutely. So Lauren, I gotta tell you, you're probably like talking to the best person, because not only am I a former federal prosecutor, not only am I married to my wife who's handled these types of cases, now I'm a current civil plaintiff's attorney, and I actually handle civil rights cases in addition to employment and other types of cases. So the answer is yes. We represent victims now, me and my law firm. I'm one of the few former prosecutors. I don't do any criminal defense work. I like representing victims. So there has been many times where I've represented a victim, let's say in a rape or sexual assault case, and we file a lawsuit. And I filed 1983s, Bivens. These are all civil rights types of claims. Officer-involved shootings and other, excessive force, just the broad category civil rights cases, where based on our investigation, we have moved forward with a civil claim. We've interviewed witnesses. We've done surveillance. We have evidence. And I packaged up that evidence in a nice bow. I've gone to the district attorney's office and saying, you know what? This is why I think a crime has occurred. And you present the case to the DA, and sometimes, because frankly, they're handling a lot of cases, they don't have the evidence. It does provide them the evidence to move forward with a criminal prosecution. I mean, we've seen it time and time again, particularly, I would say, in sexual assault cases. I mean, oftentimes they are initiated with a civil lawsuit. Someone files, right? And again, Diddy, for instance, civil lawsuits, right? The Alexander brothers, civil lawsuits, right? So there are a lot of cases where the victim decides to move forward, and based on the evidence that's uncovered in the civil claim, that gives rise to a criminal prosecution.
Okay. Great. Yeah, see, this is why I was so excited to talk to you and to pick your brain because I knew you would be the person to tell us all the things. So, um, well, that is very, very good to know. And also, I wanted to ask you what your thoughts were. I don't know if you've heard, but they decided to go with a bench trial on this one. What are your
Yes.
thoughts typically on a bench trial and then for this one?
Yeah, definitely read that. That was huge news. I have to tell you that that is not typical. Normally, if you're the defense, the conventional wisdom goes, you're much better off with a jury. You just need 1 out of 12 to hang the panel, right? With a judge, you're really going all in on the judge. You better know your judge, know your audience. So rarely, if ever, does the defense waive a right to a jury trial. Now, in this particular case, I believe the defense attorney knows the judge pretty well. They were, or well enough, right? I think they were in the same district attorney class, if I
I believe
recall
so.
correctly.
I believe so. Yeah.
So maybe the defense knows something, or they think the argument that they're trying to make related to the self-harm is going to resonate with this particular judge as opposed to a jury. But I can tell you, Lauren, this is not typical, and sort of defense lawyering 101. We talked about it. Attack the prosecution, take your chances with the jury, not a judge. So we'll see if it works out for them, but it is a risky play here.
Yeah, I know. I really I like the judge so far. He seems very fair, but I get so nervous, especially in Massachusetts with the judges and the things like that. It just makes me nervous, but I'm very hopeful, and it like both sides have said, it seems like a pretty easy case, his word against her word, and there were no body cameras,
Yeah.
which brings me to another question for you. In 2025, when this happened, North Andover Police Department was funded for these body cameras and they decided against them, which to me kind of blows my mind. What are your thoughts on a police department at this day and age not having them?
I absolutely hate it, Lauren. I'm a big believer in transparency and public trust. And I don't care if it's the Epstein files or cameras in courtroom. I'm consistent. I think the public has a right to know. These are public servants. I think police officers should have body cams at all times. I think there should be cameras in every courtroom. And of course, I want to follow the law. I was in federal court. I understand the rules of criminal procedure with the Supreme Court. But there is no reason in today's day and age and technology where there should not be cameras everywhere. Because, like I said earlier in the show, Lauren, cameras don't lie. People lie all the time, right?
Yes.
Witnesses, victims, defendants. Cameras don't lie. Why don't you have cameras? It will completely change how cases are analyzed, what jurors see. Because if we're talking about finding out the truth,
Yeah.
what better truth is there than video footage? So I think all police officers should have them, and they should be mandated to use them, because even here in California, handle a number of cases where it malfunctioned. Really, I lost
Right.
the video. It wasn't working. I forgot to turn it on. So, it's not just having the body cams, but actually turning them on. I think that's very important.
Yeah, and Nima, like, we wouldn't be here. We wouldn't be going to trial more than likely had they just had the body camera on. I mean, it seems so crazy. It protects the police as well as the public. And I've learned that they still, to this day, do not have body cameras. And to me, that is a real problem. It's what are we doing? You could have saved yourself so much trouble if what you're saying is true. So it doesn't do a lot for the public narrative.
Oh, I agree. It's unconscionable that you don't have body cams. They're not turned on. every police encounter. I don't care if you're giving someone a ticket, you're law enforcement. At any moment, it can escalate into potential crime. It could be deadly. So we should have them all the time without exception. There's no reason to go without.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, what can we do to restore the public trust than to have a video of what exactly happened? So it seems crazy to me, and hopefully that's something that will change in the future because of this case. Now there are kind of things that are coming out, some allegations, some recordings, some phone calls, where Justin, before he has the police give the RO, is kind of plotting a little bit with the police department and getting their take on what he can and can't do and things like this. What are your thoughts if they were in fact planning and not wanting Kelsey to know that this restraining order was coming? Because that day of the incident, she had just gone to the police department to have her CPR recertification because she was cleared again for work after the postpartum, and she had just gotten her service weapon back. And they specifically didn't give her radio back because they didn't want to tip her off that this was coming. I personally don't like the way it looks, but I'm not an attorney. So tell me what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, it's just, and I keep shaking my head and just how disappointed I am because it's so unnecessary. We're really just talking about an issue of service, right? We're not
Right.
talking about, so folks understand there's really sort of three cases. The case that we're talking about, the shooting, the subsequent sort of break-in allegations, but really the restraining order, right? And there's some arguments that the restraining order was obtained improperly and the evidence was perjury that was provided. But really, if you kind of just take a step back, really what we're talking about, Lauren, is just service of a document, right?
Right.
If Kelsey wanted to challenge the restraining order, that's what you do in court, right? That's what judges are for. The fact that we're involved in a shooting just because someone's being served a document, that just really just puts them on notice that the process has started. But you still have all your rights in court. You can make that argument to a judge. It just seems so unnecessary because it really has no practical effect on your rights aside from letting you know, hey, you've been served. There's a permanent restraining order here, or a temporary restraining order here, or whatever the case may be. You got to show up here with your lawyer, preferably, or without, to make your case. Otherwise, you might lose custody. But it's just a paper that provides notice. So the fact that it escalated to this level, when we're talking about a routine service that happens every single day in every state in this country, you've gotten served. That's it.
Right.
So, yeah, certainly unnecessary. And I really don't understand why it arose to this level. Now, in restraining order cases, oftentimes law enforcement, they're involved because it's a short period of time. But most of the time, we're talking about service, and people get served all the time in all sorts of different cases. As long as it's someone who's 18 years old, usually you can serve. You don't have to be law enforcement. You have to be a licensed process server, someone that can just say, hey, they signed that I provided personal service to this individual. That's really all you need. So the fact that it escalated to this level on a service issue is sort of disappointing and really begs the question, like, did we even have to end up getting here?
Right. And my whole thing from, day one is why wouldn't you just go in and take all the weapons? Then you're not in this position. Like that should be the first thing you did before you, do anything, before you go have her pack a bag for the baby, anything. Like where, what is going on?
Yeah. So folks that don't know, usually if the restraining order is granted, one of the things that will be ordered is they have to surrender all the weapons, right? That's typically, and again, you can challenge it and fight it. It's just, so it is very important. It should be the first thing that happens, especially if you know someone has access to weapons because they're law enforcement. I mean, it's so dangerous. And it's really, if it were anyone else they didn't have a relationship with, they probably would have handled it very differently. They thought, okay, well, here's someone I know, Kelsey Fitzsimmons, I've worked with her. But if you're following the rules and you're following the law, you really do need to make sure that those weapons are or retrieved so that person isn't a risk to themselves or others.
Right. I just think it all could have been avoided, and there's potentially some liability down the road, at least it seems. Then I wanted to ask you, I guess, and now knowing that your wife does this with
Mm.
with the family court as well, um, something that has been an issue is that Justin is refusing and hasn't let Kelsey's parents see the baby in almost a year now. She hasn't seen the baby, and the grandparents haven't been able to see them. And they were someone who was used to seeing the baby almost daily. So I just wonder, if you're on the family court level, how that looks to a judge, having all of this information that is coming out now, on top of the fact that we're kind of not letting people who love the baby be around the baby and all of that. What kind of an impression that would have on a family court judge?
Yeah, it's a bad look, and this is one of those areas, Lauren, that's very state specific. I can tell you that a
Okay.
lot of states, there are no grandparent visitation rights, period. The parents have an absolute right to determine who gets to see the kids. I know my parents would be heartbroken if they didn't see their grandkids. They probably, step over me to get to my
Right.
kids.
Right.
But, as far as the law is concerned, the reality is, again, most states, grandparents do not have those rights. They can't go to court. They have no right to see the kids if the parents don't allow it. So, something to kind of know if you're a grandparent. And I know people think, wow, this is terrible. How can you deny the love that I want to give my grandchildren? It can be grandparents, it can be other relatives. They usually don't have rights in most states, unless again they happen to be adopted, they adopt the grandkids, or otherwise a legal guardian or they have some sort of special relationship. Normally, by virtue of being parents to the actual parents, that's not enough.
Okay. And then I wanted to touch on a little bit. I know we have a new judge now, the one that they've chose to go with the bench, but the judge in all of the court, who was going to be handling this, was definitely interesting. I've never seen anything like it, and this is probably what got me the most fired up about the case and interested in the case, was the exchange when she put Kelsey back in prison, or back in jail. There have now been claims from Kelsey's probation officer that this judge, Kathleen McCarthy Naiman, um, went ex parte on her own over to the parole office and demanded to see the communications between this parole officer and the defense team, because she thought he was somehow in some kind of a collusion with the defense team. And when he showed them to her and there wasn't anything, she got mad and stormed out of the office. Well, come to find out, she files a claim or some kind of a disagreement, or I can't remember the word for it, against him. And so this is when he came out and let the defense know that there was this whole thing going on. Talk to me about the seriousness of that, because that, it, it never got handled, because they said that basically it's a mute point. She has a trial in another area, so she's not going to be handling the case. But that never got handled. So I just wanted your thoughts on that.
Yeah, and it was the potential basis for disqualification. So, I've been doing this for a long time, 25 years. My grandfather was a judge. Speaking of grandparents, everyone asks me, like, why aren't you a judge? And I tell them, I don't want to be a referee or an umpire. I want to, be in the game still. If you are a judge, you are supposed to be an impartial and detached magistrate. You are no longer a player. You are not to be, taking one side or another. You're not supposed to be independently investigating the case. And sometimes many of these judges, they can't shift their mentality. And that's how you're supposed to be. So if there's even an appearance that they're acting in a partisan manner, that is bad for the administration of justice. That might be a reason for them to be removed from the case. And again, obviously, I don't know what this judge did and why these communications happened, if they happened at all. But it kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier in the show about law enforcement. It's like, listen, why are you creating these unnecessary issues if you're the judge? We know what ex parte communication is. anything needs to be on the record. It needs to be with all the lawyers present, if not the lawyers and the parties present. So these types of communications, they're potentially problematic. And again, not best practice. This creates unnecessary issues for appeal. So judges get removed. So again, just like I caution law enforcement to act in a certain way, at least for the appearance of propriety. Same thing with judges. They're not immune from this. And anything that may make them look as like partisan or favoring one side or another is a huge potential problem.
And I guess I have a follow-up on that. I know she's not handling the case now. It has been, given to Judge Karp. If there is a potential lawsuit in the future, is that something that can be looked at, or because of the immunity with judges, how does that work?
They have very broad immunity. So I'm not saying it's impossible. We've sued all sorts of people, but it's next to impossible to sue a judge, even if they, make a legal error. It can be a basis for a conviction to be overturned or a reason to appeal the case, but it's very, very hard to sue a judge. So I know people ask me all the time. It's, again, it's for something that they've done on the bench. I would say the answer is very likely there's nothing that can be done from a civil claim perspective.
Okay. Well, that is good to know. Yeah, I am very anxious to see how this goes, and what comes out, and how this bench trial is going to go. Now, am I right in thinking that more information kind of comes out in a bench trial than a jury trial, or how does that go?
I think so. I think the rules of evidence are a little relaxed because, judges can kind of sort through what's relevant, what's not, and what's hearsay. And, it tends to move a lot faster, right? We've all, you and I have been on TV together covering these live trials, and sometimes it can move at a very slow pace because the question and answer. But with the bench trial, sometimes, 2-3 days, like you're done, which is, it's like lightning fast in a jury trial. So things tend to move a lot more quickly. The judge can kind of cut through the noise, the irrelevant facts. Because look, if you're the judge in this case, kind of taking a step back, if I'm the judge, I'm like, listen, the substance of the restraining order is not relevant to the assault charge in this case. The subsequent break-in, again, not relevant. Now, maybe some of this goes to, Justin's bias, if he's testifying. But if I'm the Commonwealth, probably I try to keep Justin far away from this case as possible, right?
Right.
He's a very biased witness. Like, what is he adding? He shouldn't have been there in the first place, right?
Yes.
So I try to keep the case really narrow to the officers who were involved. Obviously, the shooting officer and anyone else that was a precipient witness. So, if you're the judge and you can kind of keep this streamlined and look, was she pointing the finger, pointing the trigger and pulling the trigger with her finger at another officer? Did she intend to do that? Did she intend to point it at herself? It's really a pretty narrow question that we're dealing with. Obviously, there's so many other things happening, but they're not directly relevant to the question in this case. So if I'm the judge, I really kind of limit it to this, even though, of course, there's all these other proceedings and potential proceedings that are happening.
Yeah, and I think that the defense is kind of in the same ball game as you, because they said that too. Like, we're not planning on calling him, but if they call him, I don't know why they would, because that's potential for all kinds of stuff. But of course, as like lay persons and people who are interested, I want to see him called. But but that's a whole nother thing. For as far as Noonan's claims against Kelsey, it really is just he said, and the commands that he was giving, in my opinion, go to where the gun was a little more than what he's saying. So like her claim is she pointed it at her head, and at that moment she did not want to live anymore. Everything was being taken from her. And his commands that he was giving, according to him, and also a few other people in the home, were, Kelsey, don't do it, don't do it. But to me, that kind of bolsters her claim a little more, because we know that if a gun is pointed at a police officer, they don't have to give any kind of commands. Like it's their life or the other person. Um, so what are your thoughts about the inconsistencies of maybe that, or however you feel about it?
Yeah, Kelsey, don't do it. Don't do it. That helps the defense, no question. Even if it's your police officer friend, if someone is pointing a gun at a police officer, they're gonna fire around immediately.
Right.
I mean, that's really what they're supposed to do. I mean,
Yeah.
you're supposed to use deadly force when you're at imminent risk of death or serious bodily injury or someone else's. And having a gun pointed at you is really textbook. That's not, and again, I'm all for officers to use the least force necessary, but that is a case where deadly force is absolutely necessary. So again, the question is, what was Kelsey doing at the time? And again, obviously, I wasn't there. If she's trying to harm herself, she shouldn't have been shot. If she was pointing the finger at an officer, that is a lawful basis to
Right.
shoot her. So obviously that's the question in the case, the question the judge is going to have to decide. They're two very, very different accounts of what happened. I just can't. Sometimes, you think to yourself, well, two people can kind of see the same thing differently, and those inconsistencies can be explained. But Lauren, I just don't understand it. Right, pointing at your head, pointing at someone else, it's just so different that they both can't be right.
Yeah, it is. It is very troubling. And then there is a element to this of where Noonan's claims, so they didn't take the officer's statements on what happened until 3 days after. Um, to me, that seems long. Again, I don't know. What is your experience? And also the fact that Noonan said Kelsey dove behind the door, and there is no door in that room whatsoever. The only door that's up there is in the hallway, which is a closet.
Again,
Um,
Lauren, best practice was not followed. You want the statement immediately when it's fresh in their mind. You want the statement immediately before witnesses can talk to one another and get their story straight, right? To get a statement from someone who is a percipient witness, the percipient witness 3 days later, and that's one of those situations, again, normal protocol is there's an officer involved shooting, you retrieve the weapon, you place them on leave, there's an investigation, you go through it. To wait 3 days, again, uncommon, unless this is someone who asked for a lawyer and a lawyer wasn't available, or some sort of union rep, or some sort of reason that I can't think of. If it's this delay for the sake of delay, that is not what is supposed to happen in cases like this.
okay. And interesting tidbit that has come out in some of these hearings leading up to trial is that he is still on administrative leave. He, I guess, was granted to go back to work, and when he was supposed to show up, he didn't show up, and so they put out a welfare check because he didn't show up at the station. And when they went, his account to them was that, my bad, I took some Flexerol and was out and just didn't wake up. How how much fun is the defense gonna have with that statement at trial, Nima?
Yeah, Flexerol, for folks that don't know, it's a muscle relaxer. Um, yeah, that is. I've heard a lot. That's an interesting one. I didn't show up to work because I took some Flexerol, and it put me out. So again, just more fodder for cross examination. I'm shaking my head. You want your police officers to be good witnesses, and these are the types of things that just the defense will have a field day with. I cringe a little as a lawyer that has to be in court and kind of present these cases. I would love it if I were the defense. This is fantastic. This is
Right.
great.
Right.
I'm going to spend at least 20, 30 minutes on this. But from the Commonwealth and I'm one of the prosecutors, I'm just shaking my head at that type of statement.
Yeah, and it makes me wonder, if that was something. I know it's prescribed for short-term use, but was that something he was on the day of the shooting with being muscle relaxer, the delay of your reflexes could happen. So I just have a lot of questions.
Yeah, it's not typically used long term. It's, you're in a car accident, you suffer some sort of injury, you go to the ER, they'll give you some sort of pain meds, some sort of mild opioid, Flexerol. It's typically given, but it's not something that people end up taking. Again, I'm not a doctor, but I've seen enough of these cases to know that it's not something that people typically take for some sort of chronic issue for months and months or years on it. In my experience, but again, I hope the doctors that are watching don't come after me and say, Neema, no, you're wrong. So I'm giving my layperson legal, very limited knowledge. I didn't go to med school, but that's my understanding. But hopefully the doctors don't correct me in the comments.
We have someone actually weighing in. So apparently, what was filed was the complaint against the PO with defense colluding. So thank you for that, Jess. Which is kind of a big allegation in itself. And then to not have anything that was found when she did this independent investigation is just wild to me.
Yeah, no, I mean, no question, right? You have the judge kind of investigating the case, potentially making accusations against, probation officer. Obviously, they're an arm of the court as well. So really kind of wild case in terms of so many different things going on. I think one day that they may make a movie out of it. I'm not trying to make light of
Yeah.
it, but someone was shot, but there's just so many different things going on here. It's just, it's one of those things like it almost could be, a storyline of some Netflix series, because there's many, many different moving pieces.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, you don't want to see this happen, but it is happening, and maybe that would be a good way of, getting her story out there if that was out there. And I will tell you one good thing that is kind of coming out now is that Kelsey went to law school, half of law school before she became a police officer. And she is planning on going back to law school after this. So
Oh,
I
that's
was
good.
very excited to hear that, and wish her the best of luck in that endeavor.
I'm happy for her. She's obviously had some postpartum, other mental health issues. Now she's really going to have them when she takes the bar exam. So
Right. Exactly. Yeah, she's a very impressive person. She's accomplished a lot in her only 28 years or 29 now of being on this planet. So, I hope that she's able to put this past her, because whether or not she gets convicted or not, it is a small blip in what her, life will be. And she has no priors, and, she won't hopefully spend any more time in jail, since she's already spent so much
yeah,
time with that judge.
we'll certainly wish her the best. Her, obviously, Justin, the child. These cases are really sad. And again, just talking about other recent developments, it's really sort of the kids that suffer the most, unfortunately, in these really nasty and sometimes violent custody disputes. So obviously, I really hope and wish the best for their child as well.
Yes, and now that Judge McCarthy is not on the case, this judge was able to overturn some of the things she kind of stepped in front of for the family court. So Kelsey is now able to kind of get the ball rolling to at least have supervised visits with who's her son, who she hasn't held in almost a year. So that is just, I can't wait for that to happen, because it should have been happening, at least supervised visits.
I hope so. Those supervised visits are sad, obviously, for
Yes.
folks that don't know. There's a monitor there, and it's just, it's certainly not the same as being with your own child. So I hope the truth comes out in this trial or trials. Those who are responsible are held accountable. But ultimately, again, this very young child gets to reunify, as we call it in the legal world, with her parent or their parent or parent.
Yes, absolutely. Well, Nima, I cannot thank you enough for your knowledge and just your expertise in everything. It's invaluable. And the fact that you took up time on your Friday to hang out with me, I am forever grateful. And I will always be watching all of the things you're doing. And obviously, I hope that they have you back on Court TV now that the new changes have happened. I don't really know what's going on too much, but hopefully we'll be back on the show with Vinny at some point in the future.
I
So
hope so too. Obviously, big
yes,
changes. Court TV, for folks that don't, they were acquired by Law and Crime, which is another streaming service. So hopefully, I mean, I've been on both many, many times, as have you, Lauren. Hope to be on again with you. And if not on your show, obviously we're going to be following Kelsey and Justin's case. And I think I want to wish you the best first day of spring. Have a great weekend and hope to see you real soon.
You as well, my friend. Thank you, Neema. Have a great weekend.
Thanks, Lauren. Bye.
Bye. All right, guys. Isn't he the best? My goodness. I mean, he's so impressive and just a great guy, just a good human. And I'm just so happy that he came on to talk to us about this case and share his expertise because again, this case has not gotten the publicity that I think it deserves. And so yeah, everybody please like and share so that we can share this. I got the times confused, guys, so I apologize. I was getting ready and his assistant called and was like, "Oh, he's on." I'm like, "Oh gosh, give me 5 minutes." So I messed up the times. The times went back and forth because he has so much going on. He's literally so busy. The times changed like 3 or 4 times and I completely got it wrong. So my apologies to everyone who was expecting this show to start. I guess 9 minutes ago. But thank you so much for being here. Now we are going to have the Kelsey Fitzsimmons fundraiser in not even an hour. So please come back. If I knew how to do the fancy things where it would send you there already, I would do it. I have not figured that out yet. But again, my apologies for the time mishap and all of that. But the good thing is this is, it'll be there on the YouTube. So you can go back and rewatch it. And share it and get it out there with all of the goodies kind of that we had kind of told to us. I mean, this is really cool. This is like the first thing that I was like, I need to get him on the show at some point because I knew like he would have all the details and I didn't even know that his wife. His wife, first of all, is gorgeous. She's like a supermodel, guys. She's gorgeous. But I didn't know that she worked with the family court. So he had that layer of knowledge that we weren't even expecting. So just really cool to get his insight on that. And I know him personally, so I know he's going to be following this case now. And I don't know how much he knew about it before. I spoke to him and asked him to be on the show. So look, we're getting it out there and he speaks to a lot of other stations and he's on like Entertainment Tonight. He's on a lot of things because he really has so much knowledge about a wide variety of things. So that'll be another person that hopefully is speaking on this case. And forgot to ask him how everyone can reach him. But anyways, I can put his deets on the description and things like that. But just an insight that we didn't have before on a federal level. So we will see. But yes, thank you all for being here. Thank you for showing up and hanging out with me. And I will be back with some amazing guests. We're going to have, of course, the fantastic Maza will be joining me for Kelsey's fundraiser here in less than an hour. We have Nurse Kim, my favorite, my queen, that will be coming on, as well as Ali Mata. I've been wanting to get them on. Bob has other plans, but we are so excited to have Ali on. She is really pissed off about this stuff with Justin and the custody thing. So I can't wait to have her on and get her intake, and have her tell you guys how she's feeling about this case as well. And then Emily C is going to try to join us later after she gets little man down for bed. So we should have a really good show. And this is our final push to get some more funds for Kelsey because trial starts Monday and it's going to be, it's a living, breathing thing. So who knows what happens and whatever else they may need to bring in witnesses and things like that. So if you can share the fundraiser when we go live, share it, let people know to get the word out. And I think Nurse Kim is live right now. So I'm going to let you guys go. Oh, hi, Baker. Hello. We will miss you tonight. I know I normally have been trying to do on Sunday so you can join us, but with going up there and going to Massachusetts and stuff over the weekend, I'm not going to be able to do a Sunday one. So we're going to miss Baker tonight. But we will obviously have him back and back on the show soon, and maybe you come over to my house this time. So anyways, I will see you guys soon. Go over to Nurse Kim and give her support, and I will see all you guys really soon for the fundraiser. Thank you so much for being here. Bye, guys.